Hello, this is Kenzie. I hope you're doing well. So, for part two of Project 3, we're going to be focusing a lot on reading comprehension like we've been throughout the whole semester, but I want to break it down a little bit more as to the assignment we're doing and with my student. Some limitations that students face and teachers face with reading comprehension assessments is resources is a big one because if a student doesn't have the resources they need or even just the beneficial resources compared to other students, then they're less likely to do as good as the other students. For example, if a student at home has a Kindle, they have more resources to more books and different kind of readings, different experiences to read different kinds of material compared to a student at home who maybe only has a couple books to choose from. The student with the Kindle is going to be more likely to want to read because they have more to choose from. Experiences is also a big one. If a student is able to have a parent read to them like every night before bed or every morning, then the student is being able to listen to the different words and sounds of the reading compared to a student whose parent works too much and isn't able to go home and read to their student. That kid is definitely going to be a little bit behind compared to the student who gets read to every single night. Teachers also have a big impact on a student's reading comprehension. So as a teacher, when you're making like an assessment, I think it is important to try meeting all the needs of each student. A lot of pre-made assessments are extremely biased and only focus on the majority of students rather than the minority as well. So this is definitely an issue and can make the student look different than what they actually are and can also set the student up for failure rather than success. So as a teacher, you want to make sure with your tests that you create, that you're making them fair to every student and giving them all equal opportunities. But also doing your job and making sure when you're teaching the students the material that they are all understanding the material and their needs are all being met, and you're using different kinds of resources and different ways of teaching the material rather than doing it all cookie cutter one way. Another limitation for pre-made assessments is abilities of the students. Some students might have a learning disability such as dyslexia. A student with dyslexia is going to be less likely to be or like to test high like on the same test compared to a student who doesn't have that difficulty in their life. So recognizing like different abilities of students and disabilities of students is also really important for pre-made assessments because like I said, it's not fair to all students like to have to take the same test. Like if one struggles in a certain category, that's not gonna meet their needs, like having to take the same test as everyone else who succeeds in that area. Like another example could be ADHD. If you're gonna make a student sit down and take a test that's like an hour and a half long, like the students who don't have ADHD are for sure gonna be more successful on the test compared to a student who has ADHD because you can't force them and expect them to sit down and listen and be able to take that test when their brain physically cannot focus for that long of time. For the cognitive model, it talks about phonological awareness, so the spoken languages like at home. If a student's family speaks like Spanish at home and they grew up listening to Spanish, like surrounded by Spanish, and then they go to English speaking school, English is not going to be their first language, so it's going to be a little harder for them to understand. So reading comprehension can be more difficult for like students in that situation since they understand their language better. If they don't understand English fully when they're reading, they're not going to be able to comprehend the material as well compared to a student who speaks English and has grown up speaking English. Print concepts is another part of the cognitive model that talks about the understanding of letters, words, and sounds. So making sure your student understands the sounds like each letter makes will definitely help them understand the words and like how to say the words and what the words mean, as long as they first understand the sounds and meaning of the letters. So you want to break that down. Like first make sure your student knows the letters, like A, B, C, D, E, and then make sure they know the sounds each letter makes. Like M makes a sound or P makes a sound P. So then once you're able to get a word, let's say mom, you would want the student to know how to say M, O, and then it's M again. So this one's an easier word for the student. So M, M. That's a good way of breaking it down so your student can understand the word. And then there's also purpose for reading. So is your student reading for fun, or are they reading because they're being forced to? That's also like a very, very good concept that relates to reading comprehension. I feel like a student is definitely going to be able to comprehend a reading that they're reading for fun better than a reading that they're being forced to read, because the reading for fun kind of gives them the freedom and opportunity to choose something that they are interested in rather than being forced to read something you have no interest in. You're less likely to care about the subject or understand it since you don't really care that much. And then for the model I decided to look over for this project was the top-down model. We didn't talk about it in class, but I did do some research on it on my own. The top-down model is a pretty basic model, easy to understand. It focuses on the reader's background, so that also relates to the reader's experiences, like um, anything that they have done in their past that can relate to reading comprehension. Some students are going to have a better reading background compared to other students, which can make their reading comprehension at a higher level compared to other students. And then it also talks about the reader's meaning. So when you're reading a book or the student's reading a book, how they interpret the reading, how they take the material compared to other students. Not every student's going to have the same understanding of the passage you just read. And then lastly, it talks about whole to part and part to whole. I really like this part because it can kind of relate to like anything, but with reading comprehension, it's like part of the reading with the other part of the reading, understanding each part and then putting it together as one whole to understand it all together. Or if the student already understands that, then you can take the whole part of the reading you just read, and the student, that's a lot of material, so the student can't understand all of that material at once. So you break it into two pieces to understand one, to understand the other, to put it back together. So whole to part and part to whole is a really good strategy for your students to get a better understanding of the reading and to help their reading comprehension just by breaking it up and letting them like see it one on one rather than one whole thing. That can be a little overwhelming for students sometimes. Pre-made assessments do have many limitations that would include it doesn't meet all students' needs. Material can change like throughout like the year, or new data can come out. Other limitations include for pre-made assessments include the environment of the student, like where are you forcing the students to take the test at? Are they going to be able to like focus on them? Or the biggest thing that I think is a big limitation for pre-made assessments is it is not going to ever meet every student's needs because it focuses on the majority of students rather than the minority. And I think that's a huge issue as well. And then to avoid bias with pre-made assessments, I think students should for sure get a better understanding of their students and see where each student is at, and then make the test based off of that, just so it at least you're trying to meet each student's needs rather than focusing on the majority like I mentioned before. Even in teaching, when I'm teaching to avoid bias, like I said, like meeting with each student and like doing different kinds of teaching and learning, like hands-on, visual, listening, like that will definitely help the student learn whatever subject it is as well, because they're trying different things and it's relating to more students rather than like the ones who are good at listening. The main 5 things I would like to focus on to plan my lessons with the students' literacy would be interest, so what the students are interested in like at home. So let's say like a student loves art. So if we get a book where the character also loves art, that student's going to be more likely to like the book because it relates to them more. That's just an example though, like not real. Or even like it could be like science. Another thing would be skill level. So making sure my students are reading the right book for them. So if they're like in 2nd grade but their reading level is a 3rd grade book, then you want them to have a 3rd grade book so they're not bored reading material that's too easy for them. Or it could be vice versa as well. And then there's experiences. So knowing what my students like have done in their past and like what my students haven't done is also good to help my students become successful. And then figuring out if my student likes to learn independently or dependently. So if they want to read on their own versus if they want to read with a friend, That was a big thing, and I think is also beneficial to students. Like buddy reading is also a good idea. And then the environment that students like to read in is also a big factor. So rather than making them like sit at the desk and read at their desk, allowing them to read outside or allowing them to sit in bean bags while they read or on the rug is also very important. Important things that I'll use to teach my students literacy and make my classroom more effective. If I were able to interview each of my students, the 5 questions I would ask them would be what their favorite book is, where their favorite place to read is. So that could be like at home on their bed or on their trampoline or in a hammock or at the park or at school. How much they read at home, like per week. So if they go home and read every night before they go to bed versus if they just read when they feel like it, so a couple times a week. That's definitely a big influence on their reading comprehension level. And then what kinds of books they like to read. So if they like to read fantasy, um, or if they like to read like science books, that's also important to help my students and me be able to teach my students. Lastly, I would ask them either what they like most about reading or what they dislike most about reading. I feel like I would ask them what they dislike more about reading compared to what they like more, because understanding and me knowing what my students don't like about reading can help me focus even on that a little bit too, to try resolving that issue for my students. So to get like their dislikes out of the picture is also important to help the student enjoy the reading and become more successful. But yeah, that's all I have for this video. It was nice, or it was a good semester with you, and I hope to have you again in one of my other classes, and I hope you have a good Christmas. Bye.